The latest confrontation does not start with noise. It starts with an awkward silence. Imagine the land surrounded, crowds rising up against God, Satan unleashed for the last time, gathering nations as if he could still win, and at the heart of it all, the question that scares anyone who reads Revelation 20. Why would God allow this again? After so much pain, so much fall, so much spiritual warfare, why would Satan still have one last chance to deceive? This is where the video begins. Not in the past, not in a distant theory, but in the final scene, at the moment when the rebellion tries to breathe its last time. Revelation says that Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations. And this changes everything, because it reveals something that many ignore. The end of the story will not just be a trial, it will be an exhibition. God will show before heaven, earth, and angels that rebellion was never a lack of proof. There was never a lack of light. It was never a lack of warning. It was choice. But there is an even deeper detail. If Satan has already been defeated, why does he still fight? If God already reigns, why is there a last conflict? And if the lake of fire is already prepared, why does the story still need to go through this final scene? In this video, you will enter the ultimate spiritual battlefield of the Bible. Satan's final deliverance, the last mistake, the role of angels, the definitive judgment, and the moment when the rebellion will be ended forever. But before you understand Satan's end, you need to see something. The last battle doesn't just reveal who Satan is, it reveals who humans become when they reject God for the last time. And then comes the hardest part to accept. Satan will be released, not by accident, not because God lost control, not because evil found a hidden loophole. He will be released because there is something that still needs to be revealed. And this is one of the most uncomfortable scenes in Revelation 20. After a period of imprisonment, after a time in which his direct influence seems limited, Satan returns to action. He sets out to deceive. He looks for hearts. He brings nations together. But why? Why would the enemy be released if the world has already known the consequences of sin? Why allow the latest mistake after so many centuries of pain? What almost no one realizes is that this final deliverance is not a new opportunity for Satan to win. It's definitive proof that he never changed. Even after being arrested, even in the face of judgment, even though you know your time is up, he remains rebellious. And this is where everything gets more serious, because this scene isn't just about Satan. She talks about everyone who still chooses to believe in him. There's something scary about that. The final rebellion is not born in a vacuum. She finds space in people who, even though they see the truth, still prefer the lie. Satan deceives, yes, but he only manages to bring together those who still have an open door to rebellion within themselves. So the question changes. It's not just, why will Satan be released? The question is, why will there still be those who follow him? And that question weighs, because in the end times, deception will not come as something weak, obvious, or ridiculous. He will come as a promise, like strength, like false hope, as a last attempt to convince the world that it is possible to exist without God. But there is a detail. This will be the last lie. And when it falls, nothing will be hidden anymore. Before the last war, there is a scenario that seems impossible. a world after the fall of the evil system, a time when Satan is not deceiving the nations as he once was. A break in the storm, a sense of order, of control, rest. But this rest carries a silent question. Does peace remain when the tempter disappears? Revelation 20 shows Satan imprisoned for a set period, and this reveals something powerful. God is not improvising the end of the story. Each event has a limit. Every force has a measure. Even evil only moves when God allows it. But there is one detail. Satan's temporary absence does not mean that all hearts have been transformed. And that's what makes the scene so serious. Because many people imagine that the problem in the world is just the presence of the devil. But the Bible shows something deeper. Evil is not just outside. It also tries to take root within the human being. So when Satan is arrested, the world sees something it has never seen so clearly. What would existence be like without his direct influence? But this answer does not end the story. She prepares the last revelation. Because when he is released, it will be clear who truly belongs to God and who has simply adapted to the peaceful environment. Can you understand the weight of this? It's not just about prophecy. It's about loyalty. It's about what's in the heart when the pressure changes. It's about who stands firm when everything seems resolved. And this is where the tension grows. The peace before the last battle is not the end. It is the test before exposure. The world seems calm, but there is a question waiting to be answered. When Satan whispers again, who will still listen? And that answer will pave the way for the most frightening conflict in history. And when Satan is released, he wastes no time. He leaves. This word seems simple, but it carries enormous weight. He leaves prison not to observe, not to surrender, not to recognize God's authority. He goes off to do exactly what he's always done, to deceive. And this is where the final rebellion begins to take shape. Satan does not appear as a desperate loser. He acts like someone who is still trying to build one last illusion of victory. He goes to the nations. He touches old wounds. It awakens hidden desires. He rekindles the lie that has accompanied humanity since Eden. You can live without God. But there is a dark detail to this. He doesn't create rebellion out of thin air. He just calls out what was already stored in many hearts. And then comes the last movement against God. Nations are gathered. People are convinced. Crowds begin to move as if they have found a cause. But what they really found was a lie dressed up as freedom. Have you ever noticed how deception rarely feels like deception at first? It looks like a solution. It looks like courage. It feels like independence. It feels like an answer to an old pain. And perhaps that is why so many will follow Satan in the end. Because he's not going to come forward and say, "Come to destruction." He will present himself as if he is offering one last chance to take control. But control of what? From a world that already belongs to God, of a destiny that has already been decided, of a war whose end has already been written. This is where the scene becomes almost absurd. The creature rises up against the Creator. The defeated gathers armies against the eternal King. The lie tries to surround the truth, and still crowds follow. Revelation describes this movement as something vast, coming from the ends of the earth. It's as if the hidden rebellion spreads until it reveals its true size. But there is still a deeper question. Why does God allow them to come together? Because before the final judgment, the rebellion needs to show its own face. Nothing will be disguised. Nothing will be in between. Nothing will be hidden behind excuses. The last spiritual conflict will also be the last exposure of the human heart. And when this crowd surrounds God's people, it will appear that evil is advancing, but in reality, he will just be walking towards the place where he will be locked up forever. The final army is not born from a single nation. It comes from many places, of many people, of many hearts that inside had already chosen to resist God even before Satan called them. Revelation uses a frightening image. They are like the sand of the sea. In other words, it is not a small lost group. It is not a weak revolt. It's not just a powerless last cry. It's a crowd. And this is where the scene gets heavy. After everything that God has revealed, after everything that heaven has shown, after the entire history of sin has been exposed, there will still be people willing to follow the ancient serpent. How is this possible? This question is uncomfortable because it touches on something real. Human beings can see signs, hear warnings, know the truth, and still prefer rebellion when the heart does not want to surrender. But there is one detail. This army doesn't just march against a city. He marches against the symbol of God's presence, against the separated people, against what represents the victory of the kingdom. They surround the camp of the saints. The image is strong. On one side, the rebellious crowd. On the other, the people of God. Above all, the sky watching. And in the center of the scene, Satan, trying to make it seem like the number of his followers is a sign of power. But quantity was never proof of truth. And this is one of the biggest pitfalls of the latest conflict. The evil will seem great. It will look organized. It will seem impossible to contain. Perhaps, for a moment, the scene seems to repeat all of humanity's ancient wars: fear, siege, pressure, threat. But this time, there is a difference. There will be no new negotiations. There will be no other cycle. There will be no other age of deception. This will be the last advance. And the closer the crowd approaches, the clearer the reality becomes. Satan is not leading an army to victory. He is leading his followers to judgment. And yet they move forward. Why? Because the final deception doesn't have to make sense. He just needs to feed his pride. You just need to convince the rebellious heart that there is still a chance to overcome God. And this is where everything starts to point upwards. Because when the enemy surrounds God's people, the answer does not come from the earth. It comes from the sky. And when the answer comes from heaven, a question immediately appears. Where are the angels in this last battle? Because since the beginning of biblical history, they appear at decisive moments, guarding paths, delivering message S, executing judgments, serving God with an obedience that Satan rejected. But in the final conflict, their role carries even greater weight. They are not confused. They are not insecure. They're not waiting to find out who wins. The angels know that victory belongs to God, and that changes everything. While Satan gathers a multitude on earth, heaven remains in order. There is no panic in the eternal kingdom. There is no threat capable of shaking the throne. The rebellion seems great from below, but seen from heaven, it is already surrounded by God's judgment. But there is one detail. Angels also testify. They saw the first rebellion. They saw the fall. They saw deception spread throughout creation. They saw the pain, the lie, the accusation, the violence, and the resistance of evil. Now they see the final chapter, and this scene reveals something profound. God does not end the story in a hidden way. He does this in front of all creation. Heaven watches, the angels contemplate, the universe understands that judgment is not impulse, it is perfect justice. Do you notice the difference? Satan acts in chaos. God acts with authority. Satan stirs up crowds. God does not need to prove strength by quantity. Satan surrounds the saints. God surrounds the entire story with his final decree. And perhaps the angels are there as living witnesses of a truth that will never be questioned again. Rebellion against God does not produce freedom. It produces destruction. But the most feared moment is still missing. The crowd is gathered. Satan is exposed. The saints are surrounded. The sky is watching. And so no long war, no even contest, no real chance for the enemy. God responds. And then the moment happens that ends the illusion. Satan gathers. Nations advance. God's people seem surrounded. But the battle does not develop as the rebels imagined. There is no tie. There is no exchange of forces. There is no long war between two equal powers, because God and Satan have never been equivalent opposites. And this is one of the most important truths in the entire Bible. Satan can rebel, he can deceive, he can accuse, he can gather crowds, but he never stops being a creature. God remains God. And when the enemy reaches the limit, heaven responds. Fire descends. The rebellion is definitively stopped. The last advance ends before turning into victory. The crowd that seemed countless discovers too late that they were surrounding what God protects. But there is a detail that makes this scene even stronger. Satan is not just defeated on the battlefield, he is thrown into the lake of fire. Not like someone who lost an ordinary dispute, not like a leader who just failed in his last strategy, but as the author of the rebellion being led to his final destination. And here everything changes. The ancient serpent, the accuser, the deceiver of the nations, the one who dragged so many away from God. Now, you no longer have access. He no longer has a voice. There is no longer any temporary detention. There is no next attempt. It's the end. But note, judgment does not come because God was surprised. Judgment comes because divine patience has reached its final point. Throughout history, God has revealed, warned, called, corrected, and shown mercy. But the rebellion persisted until the last second. And when she finally shows her full face, no mask, no apology, no regret, judgment becomes inevitable. Can you feel the weight of it? The scene does not just reveal the power of God. It reveals the justice of God. Because evil will not just be contained. It won't just be removed. It won't just be silenced for a while. It will be terminated. And perhaps this is the most impactful part. Satan will not fall because he found someone smarter. He will fall because he faced the Holy One. The last battle ends without God needing to prove anything. His presence is already the answer. And when Satan is thrown into the lake of fire, the question that has accompanied the entire story will finally meet its limit. How long will the evil continue? The answer will be clear: never again. The lake of fire is not just the end of Satan, it's the end of the rebellion. And there is a huge difference between these two things, because Satan could be removed, and the question still remains: could evil return? Could another voice be raised? Could creation enter the same cycle of lies, fall, and pain again? But Revelation points to something more definitive. The lake of fire appears as the final destination of the devil, the beast, and the false prophet. It's not a break. It is not a prison term. It is not a break before another attempt. It's final judgment. And this carries a weight that the human mind almost cannot measure. Because, for the first time, the history of rebellion reaches a point of no return. The serpent that deceived in the garden, the voice that accused, the enemy who tried to destroy God's plan, the spirit of opposition that crossed generations. All of this finds its limit. But there is one detail. The lake of fire not only shows Satan's destiny, he shows the seriousness of rejecting God until the end. This is why this scene should not be seen as a spectacle. It should be seen as a warning. Evil does not end because it becomes weak. Evil ends because God judges fairly. And when this judgment takes place, no lie remains. No pride finds shelter. No rebellion can hide behind beautiful words. The last mask falls. And perhaps this is what scares the most. Satan has always promised freedom, but his path ends in eternal prison. Always promised power, but ends up without control. He always promised victory, but ends up facing judgment. Do you notice the inversion? Everything he offered was false, and everything God warned was real. Therefore, the lake of fire does not just end a war. It ends a narrative. The narrative that it is possible to defy the Creator and still stand. After that, there will be no other uprising. There will be no other mistake. There will be no other battlefield. The rebellion will have come to an end. But the question that remains is even more personal. If this is the ultimate destiny of evil, why do so many still treat rebellion as if it were freedom? And this is where this prophecy stops seeming distant. Because Revelation 20 doesn't just talk about an end-time event. It speaks of a decision that begins now, within the human heart. The last battle is yet to come. But the central question is already before every person. Who do you listen to when God and lies speak at the same time? Because Satan will be thrown into the lake of fire at the end. But before that, he still tries to deceive, still trying to distort. It still tries to make wrong seem like freedom, sin seem like strength, and distance from God seem like independence. But there is one detail. The final deception will not be completely new. It will be the ultimate form of an ancient lie. You don't need God. This phrase can appear in many ways. In pride, in spiritual coldness, in distractions, in hidden choices. In a life that seems normal on the outside, but inside it moves further and further away from the truth. And that's why this video matters. Not to create empty fear, not to feed directionless curiosity, but to show that the story is moving towards a real closure. Evil will not continue forever. Satan will not deceive forever. The rebellion will not rule forever. God will have the last word. And when that day comes, it won't matter how many voices followed the lie. It won't matter how many thought the majority was right. The size of the assembled army will not matter. Only one thing will remain, the truth of God. Then the question approaches us. If in the end, Satan will still find those who follow him, what protects a heart today from falling into the same deception? Maybe the answer starts here. Don't treat God's voice as something ordinary, because every final rebellion begins long before the last day. It begins when someone hears the truth and decides to postpone surrender, and now there is the question that no one can avoid. When everything is revealed, whose side will each heart be on? Because the last battle will not just be about Satan surrounding the saints. It won't just be about fire coming down from the sky. It won't just be about the lake of fire and the end of the rebellion. It will be about the truth being exposed in front of everyone. The lie will have its last speech. The rebellion will have its last movement. Satan will have his last attempt. But God will have the last word. And that changes the way we look at the present, because perhaps the danger is not just in the great mistake at the end. Perhaps the danger lies in today's small mistakes, those that seem harmless, those who enter slowly, those who convince the soul to leave God for later. But there is one detail. In the end, no one will be deceived because there was a lack of warning. The problem was never a lack of light. It was light resistance. And Revelation 20 places us before a scene impossible to ignore. Satan will be released, deceive the nations, gather rebels, surround the people of God. And then he will be cast forever into the lake of fire. The rebellion ends. The accuser is silent. The enemy doesn't come back. But before that day arrives, the question remains open to us. Are you just watching this prophecy? Or are you seeing yourself inside it? Because every time the truth calls, there is a decision. Every time God confronts the heart, something is revealed. And every time someone chooses to ignore it, the door opens a little wider to deception. So don't treat this message as just a study about the future. Treat it as a warning about the present. If this video made you think, write in the comments, God will have the last word. And before you leave, reflect on this. Satan will be defeated in the end. But the big question is whether he is still being heard now.